Picture a horizon with no roads, no borders, no cities. Just grass, wind, and a wagon creaking forward. 5,000 years ago, that wagon carried everything a family owned. Inside it sat the seeds of the modern world. We call these people the Yamnaya. You've probably never heard their name in school. Yet nearly every person reading this right now carries their blood, speaks a language shaped by their tongue, and lives inside customs they built from scratch on the open steppe. They had no writing. They left no monuments like Egypt's pyramids or Rome's arenas. What they left behind was something quieter and far more powerful, a way of living that spread across an entire continent and never really disappeared. So what did these wandering herders actually know that we've forgotten? Something about staying flexible, staying mobile, and staying alive when the ground beneath you refuses to cooperate. Pause. Before we dig in, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from today. I'm curious how far this story has traveled to reach you. Let's step back onto the grass where it all began. To understand the Yamnaya, you have to understand their world first. Around 3300 BCE, the land stretching from modern Ukraine to Kazakhstan wasn't good for farming. Rain was thin, soil was tough, rivers ran far apart. Winters could freeze a river solid, and summers could turn the same ground to dust within weeks. Most early societies solved that problem by settling down near water and building permanent villages. They planted crops, built fences, and hoped the land stayed generous year after year, even when the weather refused to cooperate. The Yamnaya solved it differently. They stopped fighting the land and started moving with it, treating the entire steppe as one giant, shifting pasture rather than a single plot to defend at any cost. They domesticated horses for riding, not just for meat. This alone was a massive leap. A person on foot could herd a few dozen animals across a short distance. A person on horseback could manage hundreds across a territory that once seemed impossible to control. They also mastered the wheel and built solid wooden wagons that could carry tents, tools, food stores, and children across hundreds of miles without ever needing to stop for long. Where a farming village was tied to one patch of soil, unable to move even when disaster struck, a Yamnaya family could pack up within a day and follow the grass wherever it grew thickest, chasing rainfall instead of helplessly waiting for it to arrive. This wasn't wandering without purpose. It was a system, refined over generations. Herds of cattle and sheep gave them meat, milk, and wool. Wagons gave them shelter on the move, doubling as homes on wheels. Horses gave them speed no rival culture could match, letting scouts range far ahead to find fresh pasture before the main group arrived. Together, these three inventions, the wagon, the horse, and organized herding, turned a harsh, empty steppe into livable, even profitable territory. Here's the twist most people miss. Mobility wasn't just survival for the Yamnaya. It became identity. Status wasn't measured by how big your house was, because you didn't have one. It was measured by how many animals you controlled and how far your influence reached across the open land. That single shift in thinking, from own land to control movement, changed how an entire people saw the world. And it explains why, when climate and opportunity aligned around 3000 BCE, the Yamnaya didn't stay put. They expanded, fast, in every direction, carrying that mobile mindset with them into Europe and deep into Asia. Pause. Genetic studies now show their DNA appearing in the remains of people living thousands of miles from the steppe within just a few centuries. That kind of spread should have taken millennia by normal ancient standards. No empire before them had spread that quickly without cities, standing armies of conquest, or a single written record to coordinate the effort. So how did they actually pull this off? It wasn't through massive coordinated armies or a single visionary leader giving orders from the top. It was something far more grassroots, something built into the everyday structure of ordinary households? The answer starts with something surprisingly simple: the family unit. Yamnaya society wasn't ruled by kings sitting in palaces or emperors issuing decrees. Archaeologists studying their burial mounds, called kurgans, found something telling about how power actually worked. Some graves are stacked with bronze weapons, ornaments, and sacrificed animals, clear signs of wealth and standing. Others nearby hold almost nothing at all. That gap tells us inequality existed early, but it wasn't organized around cities or bureaucracies the way it was in Egypt or Mesopotamia. It was organized around household wealth, mainly herds and the men who managed them. This mattered because it meant expansion didn't require a central government's permission or a ruler's blessing, the way it usually did in early river valley civilizations. A single extended family with enough livestock could break off from the main group, follow open grassland, and start a new life hundreds of miles from their relatives without asking anyone for approval. Multiply that by generations of restless, capable families making the same choice independently, and you get a slow, unstoppable wave spreading outward across the continent, family by family, herd by herd. Decade after decade after decade, their diet backed this lifestyle perfectly. Genetic evidence shows the Yamnaya were among the first populations to develop widespread tolerance for drinking milk into adulthood. Most humans before this point lost that ability shortly after childhood, the same way many people today are lactose intolerant. A trait that sounds minor on the surface turned out to be a genuine survival advantage, giving mobile herders a reliable, portable food source that didn't require settling down to farm or wait for a harvest. Their language may have been just as portable as their wagons. Many linguists now connect Yamnaya movement to the roots of the Indo-European language family, the shared ancestor behind English, Spanish, Hindi, Russian, Persian, and dozens of other languages spoken by billions of people today. If that connection holds, then somewhere in your own vocabulary, in words you use without thinking twice, a Yamnaya herder from 5,000 years ago is still, quietly, speaking. Pause. If you're finding this as wild as I did while researching it, hit subscribe. There's a lot more forgotten history worth uncovering together, and this is only the beginning of the story. None of this means the Yamnaya were peaceful wanderers with no conflict at all. Their bronze axes and daggers, found buried alongside warriors, suggest raiding and rivalry were part of daily life, especially over prime grazing land and river access. But their real weapon, the thing that actually shaped continents, wasn't the blade in their hands. It was the simple, patient ability to outlast and outmove everyone around them. So what actually happened when Yamnaya groups reached new lands far from home? The evidence buried in ancient bones tells a story far bigger than any single battle ever could. In Europe, the change was staggering, almost hard to believe when you first read the numbers. Within a few hundred years of their arrival, genetic studies show that in some regions, up to 70 to 90% of the local ancestry shifted toward Yamnaya-related DNA. That's not a light cultural influence passed along through trade. That's a near-total reshaping of who actually lived there, generation after generation. This didn't necessarily happen through massive battles wiping out entire populations overnight, the way older textbooks once assumed. Researchers now think a mix of factors was at play. Disease possibly weakening existing farming communities beforehand, intermarriage between groups over time, and the sheer economic advantage of the Yamnaya's mobile herding lifestyle, drawing local people into their orbit voluntarily rather than by force. Farming societies that had been settled in one place for 1,000 years suddenly found themselves absorbed into something entirely new, whether they consciously intended to be or not. Their burial practices tell part of this story, too. The Kurgan mounds we mentioned earlier weren't just Yamnaya features confined to the steppe. As their influence spread, Similar burial mounds start appearing across Central Europe, Scandinavia, and even parts of Western Asia, sometimes thousands of miles from where the tradition began. A ritual born on the open steppe became a shared marker of status across an entire continent, adopted by peoples who had never met the original Yamnaya face to face. Here's the part that still surprises historians studying this today. The Yamnaya didn't need writing, taxation systems, or standing professional armies to pull this off. What they had instead was flexibility, baked into every part of how they lived. They could adapt their herding lifestyle to nearly any open landscape they encountered, absorb useful local practices along the way, and keep moving whenever a better opportunity called them forward. Compare that to rigid, city-based civilizations of the same era, ones that often collapsed the moment their water source dried up or their trade routes broke down under pressure, leaving nothing behind but ruins and unanswered questions. The Yamnaya's entire culture, by contrast, was built to bend instead of break, no matter what the land or the climate threw at them. Pause. Quick question before we wrap this up. If your own way of life depended on staying flexible instead of staying settled, what would you actually be willing to give up to make that work? Quick question before we wrap this up. If your own way of life depended on staying flexible instead of staying settled, what would you actually be willing to give up to make that work? That question isn't just historical curiosity for its own sake. It's the exact trade-off the Yamnaya faced every single generation, and their answer, again and again, changed the genetic and linguistic map of the modern world in ways we're still uncovering through DNA today. So what can we actually learn from people who left no cities, no scrolls, and no statues behind them? People who built their entire legacy out of motion instead of stone, and somehow made it last longer than most stone ever does? Maybe it's this: permanence isn't the only path to lasting influence. The Yamnaya never built anything meant to last forever in stone or brick, yet their DNA, their language roots, and their burial customs are still traceable across 3 continents today, thousands of years after the last wagon wheel stopped turning. They thrived by staying adaptable when their environment demanded it, by valuing mobility over monuments, and by trusting close family units over rigid, top-down hierarchies that could crumble the moment one leader failed. In a world that often equates success with permanence, skyscrapers, empires, legacies carved in stone and meant to be seen for centuries, the Yamnaya quietly remind us that flexibility can outlast even the strongest walls ever built. Next time you look at a map of Europe and Asia, remember this: somewhere beneath those borders lies the quiet legacy of horse-riding herders who never built a single city, yet somehow reshaped everything that came after them. If this story changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe for more forgotten history and let me know below which lost civilization you want uncovered next. The steppe is quiet now, but the story it carried is still moving. One viewer, one comment, one shared video at a time.